I got a thumbs up from the back of the room, even though my clock says 3:59. That means we're going to start. Welcome to. If I get a call during this, it's probably going to ring because I tried to turn off my notifications, but I couldn't figure it out. Okay. I'm hearing an echo, but I'll try it again. Testing 1, 2, 3. I still have an echo. Testing 1, 2, 3. Rhubarb is my least favorite vegetable, but it's my favorite fruit. I'll see if I can blither along so that they can continuously test this. We got the problem. Okay, thank you. It's so nice to have tech. My name is Robert Thorson. I'm a life member of the Thoreau Society, and I'm one of those people that probably saved from teenagehood. But that was a long time ago because I actually turned over 70. Now, I can't get Thoreau here, but I can bring the globe. So we have a talk about the global Thoreau. We're ready to go. This is the plenary welcome session. Actually, the official welcome is later, so this is really a sort of welcome, not by the leadership of the Thoreau Society. Okay, but it's called All Roads Lead to Concord, which is my Rome. That is the theme of this session, and you can spot both of them up here on this globe if you like. Okay, basically I got 5 minutes of opening remarks here because I want to do some housekeeping issues. And then I'm going to turn it over to my 4 distinguished panelists so we can have a pretty good time here. Okay, let's see. Welcome one and all. We've already done that. Your presence here honors Henry David Thoreau. My personal experience testifies to the global reach of Thoreau. I basically first, picked it up in northern Minnesota in the middle of nowhere when I was a high school kid. And I actually, when I had to leave Alaska, and it was a regretful decision to move here to New England, the one advantage, a real plus on the side of having to move to New England was that it would be nearer Walden Pond. So that made a big difference to me. And my first trip around Walden Pond was with a double stroller. Okay. The theme of today's session quotes Thoreau's journal, and it invites comparisons. Both Concord and Rome are river towns. They're both navigable, especially when we had the canal here, of course. Both flooded frequently. Neither were potable in terms of the water. Remember, they were going to pipe Walden Pond water to Concord because it wasn't fit to drink out of the river. Okay, but most importantly, they're both global centers of history. Thoreau and Rome indeed have much in common. The panel is simultaneously in person. You can see real live people up here in front of you and in the audience. Okay, and it's also streaming live across the globe. That's right. This is not the world. This is the globe. There are 5 words that get mixed up. One is globe, one is world, one is earth, one is nature. I'll leave it at that. I think it's only 4. The 4 presenters in today's sessions are all guides, and each will give a talk no longer than 15 minutes, including time for questions. When asking a question, please speak up and be brief because I will be repeating the question, or somebody will, for the audience out there in the world. And I've reserved 10 minutes at the end for general questions. And the idea is that if you have pointed questions for individual speakers, the best time to do that is early. And if you have a more general question, it's better to hold those until our last 10-minute session. And of course, when we're done here at 5:30, we'll decamp and do various things. But please be sure to come back for the official welcoming, at 7 o'clock tonight with from the leadership, and then also with Megan Marshall and Robert Gross having a discussion. Okay, so I'm going to introduce all of them very briefly. Corinne H. Smith on the other end over there is an independent scholar and speaker. She runs the shop at Walden Pond. She's author of several books. Moving rapidly along here, Victor Curran, he teaches the Concord history course that prepares students to be licensed Concord tour guides. He also leads tours, and he's an interpreter at the Old Manse and Concord Museum. And I just found out about him. He had a previous lifetime in book publishing. Okay, Richard Smith. He is basically a living history interpreter. I've known him for many years. I've seen his thorough interpretations, and he's a public historian. He's also the author of 6 books. Beth Duzer is a certified interpretive guide, another public historian, and does lots of, she's a certified guide for Concord and all of those good things. So now that I've introduced them, if you want a longer biography, they're all available on the e-side or the electronic side of your program. Okay, with that, I'm going to introduce, do you have a particular order you prefer? We're going to go in order. It's a good thing they got it set up. Okay, so we got Victor Curran, and the title of his presentation is The Solid Earth, the Actual World, Bringing Concord Stories to Life with Tangible Evidence. Thank you. The timer is ticking.
Thank you, Thor. Yeah, there you go. All right, everybody hear me okay? All of us on this panel are basically storytellers. And telling stories is the most uniquely human thing that people do. We're the only species that does it, and we're really good at it. And when we do it, it's magic. Let me give you an example. Karen, you're from New Brunswick, right? Okay, I've never been to New Brunswick. But right now, we could go across the street to the Colonial Inn, get a drink, and you could tell me about your life in New Brunswick, and then that would be part of my experience. I've still never been to New Brunswick, but now it's part of my experience because you told me the story. And humans are really good at doing this. We can tell stories about stuff that never happened. We can make stuff up. Some people call that fiction. Some people call it lying. But what we do when we do history is to sift out the things that really happened from the stuff that people made up. Now, what I just said is the first thing that I say to my students when I teach the Concord History course. This is the course that Jane Gordon taught for many years. Some of you have taken it. It's the course that you have to take to become a licensed tour guide in the town of Concord. Yes, you need a license to do this. And over the 7 weeks of that course, I show students how to bring those true stories to life for visitors in the present moment, how to put foundations under the castles in the air. Now, we in this room and watching on video are here for a very particular reason, to examine and celebrate the life and ideas of Henry Thoreau. But over 1 million people a year visit Concord. They come from everywhere and they come here for all different kinds of reasons. And I and my fellow panelists forge a connection between these people and this place. Americans often come to Concord because they want to see the place where the shot heard round the world happened. Americans have to be taught the American Revolution in school. And if it's for me, I'll call them back later. Americans have to study the American Revolution in school, and they know a lot about it. About a quarter of what they know is wrong. And so what we do is to try to send them home with a deeper appreciation of Samuel Prescott, who actually raised the alarm in Concord, but without diminishing their respect for Henry Wadsworth Longfellow, who wrote the poem that says that Paul Revere raised the alarm in Concord. Now, at the same time, often in the same tour group as these Americans, are visitors from outside the US, many of whom have never heard of Paul Revere. And for them, we provide a little bit of additional context so they can understand why Americans think Paul Revere is such a big deal. Now, my colleagues and I have met our share of visitors who think they know a lot about Thoreau, too. That story about him stealing pies off of people's windowsills just won't go away, even though there is not a shred of evidence to support it. Evidence, the solid earth, the actual world. Evidence is how we separate fact from folklore. The evidence is something that visitors can see and touch, although in museums, certain restrictions apply to touching. And here in Concord, there's evidence everywhere you look. We've got the mother lode of evidence here. And it can be found in many forms. And the type of evidence that we share with visitors often helps to shape the way that we tell the story. Evidence can be a place. Walden Pond, the perfect example. Sleepy Hollow Cemetery. Evidence can be a building like this one where Henry taught school, or the house where he was born, or the house where he died. Evidence can be a marker like the one about 100 yards over here where the jail was, where Henry spent his famous night in jail in 1846. Evidence can be an object like Henry's green desk that you see in the Concord Museum, or Henry's surveying tools that you see in special collections over at the library. Evidence can be a document like the manuscript of Walking, which is also in special collections over at the library. Or it can be a work of art like the Thoreau statue up by the Visitor Center at Walden Pond. And the kind of evidence that we find helps to shape how we tell the story. Now, I don't need to tell you all that Walden Pond is a special place. And it took a lot of work on the part of the Emerson family, on the town of Concord, Middlesex County, the Massachusetts Department of Conservation and Recreation all did a lot of work to keep Walden Pond a special place. So that when you're at Thoreau's house site at Walden Pond, you aren't very far from the beach. You aren't very far from the highway. You aren't far from Starbucks. But all of those things are out of sight because Walden Pond and that place, that's part of Walden Pond, has been kept so pristine. And so it doesn't take a lot of imagination to transport visitors back to 1845 when you're at that place. Some places look nothing like they did in the 19th century. And when that happens, we have to conjure up a little magic. For instance, in Thoreau's lifetime, the abolitionist Mary Merrick Brooks and her husband Nathan lived in a house at the corner of Main Street and Sudbury Road, just about a quarter of a mile from here. In the 18th century, 100 years before that, that house was the Black Horse Tavern, which in addition to being a watering hole was also the meeting house for a group of First Parish members who got fed up with Daniel Bliss and his Calvinist rantings, and they formed their own congregation that met in the tavern and called itself appropriately the Black Horse Church. Later, when the Brookses lived there, Mary was the driving force behind the anti-slavery movement in Concord. So that house can be the starting point for many, many different kinds of stories. Here's a favorite of mine. Some of you, I'm sure, know this one. Henry's journal describes an incident that befell on this house on March 17th, 1856, when the Brookses' Irish maid Joan fell down the basement steps. Two neighbors ran to get medical help and immediately slipped in the icy street and fell in a puddle. A third would-be Good Samaritan fell down the basement steps after Joan. So whenever I read that story, I imagine the Benny Hill theme playing. Now, just for your peace of mind, Joan and all of her would-be Good Samaritans did recover. But if I want to tell visitors that story, and boy, do I want to tell visitors that story, if I take them to that spot, they don't see the Brooks house. It's not there. What they see is Concord's magnificent library, which has grown and expanded and been redesigned multiple times since it was built in 1873. By the way, come back next year. Next year, the library is celebrating its 150th anniversary. You know, a lot of good stuff going on over there. So check that out next year. But if I want to tell visitors about the Black Horse Tavern, I want to tell them about Mary Merrick Brooks rallying the town to end slavery. If I want to tell them about poor Joan and the worst St. Patrick's Day ever, I have to kind of conjure up that image for them because they don't see the Brooks house. You can see the Brooks house, by the way. When they built the library in 1873, they moved it It's on Hubbard Street, just about a block away from where it originally is. It's private home. You can't go in it, but it is there. Now, for place-based storytelling, no place in Concord is better than Sleepy Hollow Cemetery. I mean, the place itself is breathtaking, but every name that you encounter in Sleepy Hollow just connects you to something else or to someone else. So you go to Author's Ridge to visit Henry's grave. There, right across the walk, are the graves of Nathaniel Hawthorne and his family. But who's that behind the Hawthornes? Why, that's Henry's old sauntering sidekick, Ellery Channing, who finally made it to Author's Ridge in spite of being the transcendentalist half visitors have never heard of. And the other half can't stand him because he was such an awful husband to Ellen Kilshaw Fuller. Take a few steps in the other direction, and who's there? Why, it's Sam Staples, the guy who put Henry in jail. Few steps more, and you come upon Henry's fishing buddy, Edward Sherman Hoare. Edward Sherman Hoare, who was with Henry when they set fire to the Walden Woods. Edward's kind of tucked at the back of the magnificent Hoare family plot behind his more famous brother, Ebenezer Rockwood Hoare. Ebenezer Rockwood Hoare, what is he famous for? Well, let's see, he was a congressman, he was a judge, he was Attorney General, U.S. Attorney General under President Grant. He also persuaded the U.S. government to allocate 10 surplus Civil War cannons for the bronze to make the Minuteman statue out of the North Bridge in 1875. The Minuteman statue, which was created by Daniel Chester French, who's also buried in Sleepy Hollow Cemetery, just about 100 yards from his favorite, one of all his great works of art, the Melvin Memorial. You could do place-based interpretation like this all day long in Sleepy Hollow. Of course, I learned my way around Sleepy Hollow from the best, from Jane Gordon. And Jane introduced me to one of Sleepy Hollow's best kept secrets. The grave with the gravestone with the inscription, "Who the hell is Sheila Shea?" That's actually a fairly modern grave. Sheila Shea died of cancer in 1986. She was only 43 years old, but she kept her sense of humor right up to the end, as her headstone inscription tells us. The cemetery supervisors actually had to remove the location of her grave from maps of the cemetery because more visitors were going to see it than were going to Author's Ridge. Almost every time I take visitors to Sleepy Hollow, somebody asks me, is this the same Sleepy Hollow in Washington Irving's The Legend of Sleepy Hollow? But 2 years ago, a visitor asked me that question, and I said, as I always do, no, that one is in New York State. We don't have a headless horseman here. And the visitor pointed over my shoulder and he said, well, then who's that? And I turned around and there was a figure all dressed in black, playing a black guitar while riding a bicycle around Monument Square. But that wasn't the weird part. The weird part was that he didn't have a head. Well, he turned out to be Matt Dunkel, who performs under the name of Slam Dunkel, and he wasn't just pretending to play the guitar. He was actually playing the guitar while riding a bicycle with no head. He's a conservatory trained musician, and he performs on the bicycle, not just guitar. Sometimes he plays the trumpet, sometimes he plays the flute. Of course, he doesn't play the trumpet or the flute unless he actually has a head. So now we have a headless horseman. So I have to tell visitors, thank you. I have to tell visitors that we don't have we do have a headless horseman, but we don't have Ichabod Crane. So one of the most unforgettable pieces of historical evidence in Concord is the messages engraved on the windows of the Old Manse by Nathaniel and Sophia Hawthorne when they lived there, and the 1840s. And visitors who saw those as children will come back 30 or 40 years later and ask to see them again. Although 30 or 40 years can take its toll on your memory. I had a visitor one time who came and asked to see the engravings on the windows that were done in 1775 about the battle at the North Bridge. And they got upset. They were angry. Why aren't you showing me? I said, believe me, if I had an engraving from 1775, don't you think I would want to show that to you? We don't even have to give tours to get, shall we say, unusual questions from visitors. Now, as like some of my fellow panelists, I did work for a time at the shop at Walden Pond. And one time, a visitor was browsing through our selection of artwork and greeting cards and suddenly turned to me and he said, "Did you just think of someone passed?" And I was like, "You mean passed like dead?" And he said, "Yes." And I said, "No, why?" He said, "Because I just felt some love coming to you from the other side." And I said, "Well, I'll take love from whatever side it comes from." Guy says, "I hope you don't think that's weird." I'm like, "Buddy, in this shop, that's not even in the top 10 for weird." But here was the weird part. The artwork that he was looking at when he had this epiphany was by the Massachusetts artist Michael McCurdy. I knew Michael McCurdy, and he had died about a month before. So there's some things that the evidence cannot explain. Thank you.
You're okay. You're okay.
And I forgot to take questions. Questions?
Aren't questions at the end for everybody?
How are we doing this?
We got 2 minutes budgeted for questions now, and then we'll do 10 minutes later. Yeah. Yeah, 2 minutes, pointed questions. For the speaker.
All right, I saw a hand up over here. I'm sorry. I'm awaiting new hearing aids. Help me out. St. Patrick's Day, March 17th. That was the date that the Irish maid Joan fell down the steps at the Brooks house. Just by coincidence, it was St. Patrick's Day. Yeah. How can I explain what cannot be explained? I've only got 2 minutes. I'm not sure I understand the question. I'm sorry. Right. There is no hard evidence to explain that conversation with the visitor that I had about love coming to me from the other side. So that's what I just have to take on faith.
Okay.
All right.
Thank you very much. All right. So I'm setting the timer for 15 minutes. At 13 minutes, I hold the globe up.
It's longer.
I know.
They're donating time to me, I heard.
Okay, well,
Thanks.
thank you.
Okay.
If they're donating time.
Yeah, I'm gonna do a begathon at the end, just so you know. Hi. So by a show of hands, has anyone here ever been on a walking tour? I know a couple people have. Okay, good. Has anyone here ever read a roadside sign? You know, you pull over and you go and you read the signs on the side of the road. Yeah, you're my people. Has anyone here ever visited a museum? Yay! Okay, so all three of those are examples of public history. But what is public history? So in simplest terms, it is history that happens outside of academia. The sharing of history is storytelling, and some stories are told via objects, such as visiting a place that has artifacts, and some are told with words, such as an in-person talk. But these public history programs are the sharing of the person's interpretation or the place's interpretations of history with the public. In the 21st century, public history needs to provide more than facts and information. When educating today's visitors, the information also has to be entertaining. As a public historian, I decide what stories to tell and how to tell them. For my children's high school friends, I might mention the LGBTQ+ history that exists in Concord. For a tour on Louisa May Alcott, I may mention how she was a nurse in the Civil War. And for Henry David Thoreau, we're all telling the story of jail. Choosing what stories to tell is an enormous responsibility, as is how they are shared. So my name is Beth Van Duzer. I am a public historian. I have a master's in history focusing on public history. My undergraduate degree is in literature, and I'm a certified interpretive guide, which is the same training national park rangers need to take if they wish to speak to large groups. And what does all that mean? It means I like stories. I like telling them. So when I give walking tours, I always ask where folks are from. I really can't do that with all of you because it'll take too long. I already told I'm going over. So by show of hands, did anyone come here from out of Concord today? Yay, excellent. A fair few. Many people had their vacation plans put on hold because of COVID-19 restrictions that started on March 16, 2020. Being forced to not travel made everyone realize how much we like it. Just look at how many of you in the room came from out of town. You prove my point. The pandemic gave people wanderlust. Jost Krippendorf, in his book, The Holiday Makers, Understanding the Impact of Leisure and Travel, states, tourism is social therapy. It has a stabilizing effect not only on the individual, but on our entire society and economy. So my interpretation of his quote is travel makes people happy, makes the towns you travel to happy too. Now that travel has returned, visitors are rebooking trips. Visitors that choose to explore Concord are here usually for one of two reasons, the American Revolution or the Literary Revolution. But who are the original visitors to Concord? How long has tourism been here? And has it always been educational and entertaining? So according to my research, a literary experience tour was available in Concord starting in the late 1800s. 148 years ago, on June 17, 1874, Ellen Emerson wrote a letter to her sister Edith. Sarah Richardson said to me yesterday, I see in the paper that you are going to entertain all Boston tomorrow. Ellen hadn't heard of it. Sarah explained that the Christian Union was to come up and have a picnic at the monument, an address by Mr. Keyes, and then visit Ralph Waldo Emerson in his home. The newspaper paragraph ended with apparently a cordial invitation to the public. Come one, come all. Only $1 for the round trip and lunch. Ellen further stated to her sister that their father, Ralph Waldo Emerson, came home in a state of dismay, having read in 2 different papers about the visit. The letter continues. On Sunday, a young gentleman visited father to tell him of the picnic and ask him if some might come onto our grounds, perhaps 15. Now the day has come and it proves rainy. I suppose no one will come. They did, however, to the number of 72. But Ellen was not home when this occurred. On her way home, she approached the Alcutts and she thought she heard a band. It proved to be the Christian Union singing a serenade for Mrs. Alcutt, who had proposed it on the spur of the moment. Going in after they had filed away, Ellen found the family in battle array and heard the whole story, which they made very interesting. The young man had told them that they hadn't expected more than to pass through Mr. Emerson's yard, but Mr. Emerson had come to the door himself and invited, yes, insisted upon their coming into his house with all this mud. And they had all come in and he had made them a beautiful speech. As Ellen heard this and looked at the mud all over the Alcutts carpet, where, as May cheerfully said, you could plant potatoes, her heart sank, imagining the look of the Emersons' front carpet. Ellen wrote that she was frightened in vain. Their marble walks and stout mat inside the door and broad doorsteps made such a difference. The Alcutts' muddy walk was separated by 18 inches of doorstep covered by a rope mat from their carpet. The Union had conscientiously wiped their feet at the Emerson house and had no chance at the Alcutts. So this trip could be considered the beginning of literary travel in Concord. Just so you know, $1, as anyone who's visited here, does not get you round trip and lunch anymore from Boston, doesn't. But if we sit back and look at Ellen's letter from a public history point of view, it's brilliant. You know, she educates and she entertains not only her sister about visitors to Concord, but she's entertaining visitors to Concord 180 years after her account. We learn who is visiting, what it cost, that some of the literary luminaries actually took part in the tour. And importantly, Ellen's humor connects with the audience. To me, Ellen is an excellent public historian. You can read more of her letters. There's a 2-volume published tome. You can buy them at Barrow Bookstore and make me Employee of the Month, or you can find them online, archive.org. My favorite place. So the next year in 1875, the 100th anniversary of the Battle of North Bridge took place with celebrations in many towns, and of course, Concord's one of them. And to me, this is probably what put a renewed focus on the town and its famous residents and tourism. It seems George Bradford Bartlett started the official tour guide business in Concord. He published a book in 1880, just 6 years after this letter from Ellen. and it has no less than 15 revisions, and it's entitled The Concord Guidebook. In the preface of the book, Bartlett stresses this is a guidebook that will allow pilgrims to easily find whatever they are looking for. It should not be taken as a history book. However, he spends quite a bit of time on the history of the town, April 19th, and the authors. You can also find this book on archive.org. One advantage Bartlett had over anyone else that wanted to give tours in town is he's related to somebody at the Old Manse. His mother was Sarah Alden Bradford Ripley's sister. Therefore, he could give tours of a house that it was part of both revolutions. Bartlett's book was for tourists, not the person giving the tour. Today, the town prefers that guys take a local history class, taught by that guy, and pay $35 a year for a renewable license. But today's class is a history class. It doesn't really teach you to be a tour guide and to do interpretation. To learn about interpretation, which includes educating and entertaining visitors, one should read the seminal book in interpretation by Freeman Tilden entitled Interpreting Our Heritage. He wrote about 6 guiding principles for professional interpretation. The 4th principle listed in the book is the chief aim of interpretation is instruction, not instruction, but provocation. It is my delivery of facts gathered from research that I present to the visitor that provokes them. When giving a walking tour, it needs to be more than facts from note cards. An example of this is I gave a how to create a walking tour to students from Concord Academy. On the tour, I knew there was a tombstone I wanted to show them. And the stone was for L. Nathan Jones. And there's a few ways to tell his stories. And you can talk about he was born on and he died on, and he's one of the guys in town that had stuff hidden on April 19th, but it doesn't make him different than anybody else in town. So I thought I'd do this. Does everyone here know where the Colonial Inn is? Okay, yes. Next door to the Colonial Inn, there is a gray building that they've been renovating since like 2019. Okay, so that portion of the building was originally on Concord Academy's campus. So now that the kids know this, they're all like, whoa. And someone mentions part of the house that's still there is a dorm. And one of the kids on the tour actually still lives in that building. So that portion, the gray portion of the building, was built in 1780 over where Concord Academy is. And in 1793, 13 years later, it's moved to where the townhouse is today, so diagonal from the Masonic Temple. And it was there that during the 1800s, John Thoreau ran a store on the bottom floor, and his family, including his son, Henry David Thoreau, lived above the store. In 1850, the house was moved to its current location next to the Colonial Inn to make room for the townhouse. So knowing my audience and creating a connection for them on the tour made an impression. It provoked them. Additionally, the students did their own research afterwards and discovered that an L. Nathan Jones, the father of the other L. Nathan Jones, was sold the land by a Native American woman. So my carefully chosen story provokes students to dig deeper into the past, find new information, and they are actually creating their own like 3D walking tours kind of things they're going to do for their anniversary. Today, professional heritage interpreters do more than talk to their audience. According to Larry Beck and Ted Cable in their work, Interpretation for the 21st Century, deriving and communicating meaning in interpretation is to connect tangible and intangible dimensions associated with an interpretive site. So tangible elements are things that we can see or feel. Intangibles are things such as freedom, courage, and community. And almost everyone can relate to them, but not in the same way. So my final story touches on this. As you exit the Masonic Temple and look off to your right, you will see an obelisk. That is Concord's Civil War Soldiers Monument. On April 19, 1861, the first group of volunteers from Concord left town to answer President Lincoln's request to join the fight. About 450 Concord men and women took part in the war. Our monument only lists the name of men that died as a result of the Civil War. Today, the names of 48 men who gave their lives to keep a nation united are listed on a bronze tablet. However, one name is missing. The missing name is Private George Washington Dugan. George Washington Dugan was the only Black man from Concord to enlist and fight in the Civil War. He enlisted in Boston on February 20th, 1863, and was mustered in as a private in Company A in the 54th Massachusetts Volunteer Infantry, the first all-Black regiment in the North. So by show of hands, has anyone here seen the movie Glory? Yeah, that's what it's based on. It's not 100% accurate, the movie. But in real life, the 54th was chosen to lead the assault on Fort Wagner, Morris Island, South Carolina on July 18, 1863. At the end of the day's battle, Private Dugan and 50 other Black soldiers were listed by the Army as missing. The document listing them missing is available on the National Archives website. In 1865, the war ends. Shortly after the war ended, the town appointed a committee to erect a monument to the men belonging to Concord who have died in the service of their country in the war for suppressing the rebellion. On April 19, 1867, the new monument was dedicated. The purposeful inclusion in the foundation of a stone from the abutment of the Old North Bridge forever connected two important April dates in history, 1775, 1861. And in 1867, 32 names were listed on the bronze tablet, but there's 48 on there today. So what happened? 16 years later, in 1883, the tablet was changed out when it came to light that some names had been inadvertently left off. We were up to 43 names, but still no Dugan. Then in 1915, 32 years after the tablet was replaced, once again, it was felt that it needed to be replaced because of names that were inadvertently left off the tablet. And that's where we have 48 names. So knowing that the town chose to change out the plaque 2 times to add names, it makes one wonder why Private Dugan was never added to the tablet. And that brings us to today. The Civil War Monument Task Force Committee is a 5-member committee that I am a part of. We were charged with revisiting names that were previously proposed to be on the monument, but rejected, and to explicitly look at adding the name of Private George Washington Dugan. To do this, we had to see if Private Dugan met the requirements put forth by the town of Concord to adding a name to a war memorial or monument, because we're in New England, we have rules for this. And he does meet them very easily. So if he meets the requirements, why is he not on the monument? The issue was the Army listed him as missing after the assault on Fort Wagner. Only the dead could be on our monument. We know that the committees use the Massachusetts Adjutant General's information when researching names proposed to be on the monument. And actually our Adjutant General at the time in 1867 came here and talked at the dedication. So my committee presented evidence to the select board, who agreed that Private Dugan's name should be added to the tablet and that the monument should be conserved and preserved because it's 155 years old and it's never been cleaned. However, they have not allocated any funds to us. They want us to go through CPC funding and see what other things we can do. So the tangible part of my story is the Soldiers Monument just steps away from this building. The intangible parts are the freedom, courage, community. Hopefully this story connects with you. And if you want to be a part of Concord's history and help right an unintentional wrong, you can consider making a donation to the War Memorial Gift Account. Just so you know, all donations to municipalities in Massachusetts are tax deductible on federal taxes. And you can request a letter from the town. So I'd like to thank you all for listening. Did I go over? Did I go over?
You're up there. By my clock, we're not at 4:41, which is when we're supposed to go to the next speaker.
Okay.
So, wow, you don't have to take any time from anybody. That's wonderful. So we have time for a couple of minutes worth of question, and then we'll move ahead with Richard.
No. No. Oh, sorry. Is the name there now is the question? No, it is not. So we have been approved to add the name. It can cost for adding the name to the tablet, creating a new tablet, because that's what's been done before. And then cleaning the tablet and all that, it's going to cost probably 100,000 or more. So we need to fundraise. And because if we just wait for town money, it may take a lot longer. We good?
Another question? There's one in the corner.
Oh, so he was listed as missing. There are 51 soldiers that were listed as missing after the assault on Fort Wagner. Only one actually was in a hospital. The other 50 were never seen again. And you're on an island. It's not like you can swim to shore and get a job somewhere. So yeah, so they were most likely, what we believe is they were all buried in mass graves. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you very much, Beth. Thank you, Beth. I love the emphasis on stories here. So that's going pretty well. Should I tell one? No. Well, Richard's up. It's what? Every day is, I forgot the title.
So the world comes to Concord, and I am living proof of that. I moved here in 1999 from Northeast Ohio, Cleveland, Akron. And I came here in 1998 on vacation and thought, yeah, I think I should live there. And less than a year later, I moved here. I was a ranger at the national park for a couple of years. I worked at all the different sites around town. And when I first moved to Concord, first I had to learn to talk like these people because I don't have really an accent. So I had to learn to say magical words like Thoreau. And when I started to portray Henry Thoreau, this woman came up to me and she said, if you're going to be him, you better know how to pronounce the name. And I said, okay, got it. I had to learn how to say Concord. You can always tell an out-of-towner because they say that they are happy to be in Concord. Exactly. And then I had to learn to say Alcott, as in Louisa May Alcott. When I worked at Orchard House, I was training. I gave this tour to Jan Turnquist, which was nerve-wracking enough. And I gave the tour and she said, it was great, but you have to learn to pronounce the name. It's Alcott, right, John? Alcott. So I had to learn to talk like these people. And I quickly discovered over the years that really the people that come to Concord fall into 6 categories. First, there are the people that are into the Revolutionary War. We're not going to talk about them. They're their whole issue. And then there's the literary people. So you can tell the people that are here for Emerson because it's usually the retired old philosophy professors. You can tell the people are here to visit Orchard House because it's the girls and women who all think they're Joe March. You can tell that they're here for Hawthorne because they're the goth chicks. And then the Thoreauvians. Usually their hair is long, or in some cases, what's left of it, it's long. And these are the people that discovered Henry in the 1960s. And some of the younger hippies are always visiting as well, but they're all here for Henry. And then the other group of visitors to Concord are the ones who have no idea why the hell they're even here. They're not sure what happened in Concord. When I was working again at Orchard House, these people came, they were really upset with us because their concierge in Boston sent them to Concord, but he sent them to Concord, New Hampshire. And that happens all the time. We also have a lot of people that come to Walden Pond. They're not really sure why they're at Walden Pond, but they saw that really great movie with Henry Fonda. And so they're wondering, where's Henry Fonda? Where's the dock that Henry Fonda was fishing from? And I always say, well, you're right with the name. It's Henry, but not Fonda. It's Henry Thoreau. So we get a really interesting combination of people at Walden Pond. And Victor's story about, about the beyond person, that happens all the time. One time I was working at the shop at Walden Pond, the phone rang, and this gentleman said, "Are you looking at the pond right now?" He didn't even say hello. "Are you looking at the pond right now?" I said, "Why, yes, I am. I can see it out the window." He goes, "Okay, just look at it for a minute." And so I'm standing here with the phone and it's quiet for like a minute. And I said, "Okay, I'm done looking at it now." He goes, "Oh, I feel it." And he hung up. Again, we're pretty much used to that sort of thing. So in fact, if something like that doesn't happen, I'm kind of surprised. Being Thoreau, I've been portraying Henry Thoreau now for 23 years. And I'm perpetually 30 in so many ways. But as Thoreau, I'm always around 30. And it's interesting being Henry because if you think of George Washington, everybody knows what George Washington looks like. You've got that image. Abraham Lincoln, Teddy Roosevelt, there are various people portraying all of these people. You kind of have to look like him. Other than me being Henry's height, my nose is not large. Thank you, mother and father. I don't have the grayish eyes. My facial hair changes all the time when I'm Henry, but yet I feel like as long as you've got the correct clothing and all the quotes and you know what you're talking about, people buy into the image that you're really Henry Thoreau. And more often than not, I've been at the house replica at the pond and people come up and they say, "Oh, you look just like the way I imagined him to look." And I'm like, okay, great. It works for me. But people, again, they aren't really sure when they see me as and I talk about him in the third person, like this is some other guy. So people see me as Thoreau. And again, you can imagine the questions I get, especially from high school kids. Those are always entertaining. But I get a lot of questions about Henry, questions about his love life, which of course most of us know is pretty much non-existent. I get questions about vegetarianism. I get questions about going to jail. I get questions about stealing the pie. I get questions about doing my laundry and making my mother do my laundry. Those come from every place. A couple weeks ago, I was doing a program for a school group at the pond. And there was a family who kind of were watching on the side, and they went into the bookstore later after they had seen me, and they went up to Peter Alden, who was working at the shop at the time. And the little girl says very proudly, "I just met Abraham Lincoln." Not the first time I've been called Abraham Lincoln. And then another time, in fact, a few years ago for the Thoreau birthday party over at the Thoreau farm, I was there in full Henry gear, wearing my wool. And the Concord newspaper proudly reported that Richard Smith was there in his full colonial garb. So my life obviously is a really hard one. So, but I think for me, the best part about being Thoreau and being a historian in Concord is, other than the wackiness, and all of these folks can attribute to this, we meet some really amazing people. And I get into some really amazing conversations, not just as Henry, but as myself. And there are people here in this audience that I met as Thoreau or as a historic interpreter that are still some of my best friends in the whole world. And we met because of Thoreau, we met because of Concord. And so I like to talk about Concord really being, yeah, it is my Rome. Just like Thoreau said, it's my Rome. I feel like it's my Rome as well. I really feel like until I lived in Concord or started working in Concord, I was just kind of just being this historian doing stuff back in Akron. And now, you know, I get to meet amazing people and have amazing discussions, and we get into talks about transcendentalism and spirituality and Hinduism and the Native Americans. I mean, it's just an incredible array of knowledge that we get from people who are visiting Concord. Who Mrs. Emerson called the people coming to visit Emerson the pilgrims. And that's what I call the people that are here because they get it. They know what Concord is all about. They know what Thoreau is all about. They know what this history is all about. So one of the things that I always say, and I've said this to most of you that got here today, as soon as I see people coming back to Concord who I know have been here before, I always say, welcome home. Because to most of us that are here in this room, and most of us that are watching that have been to Concord, this really is home to a lot of us. And not just because of the writers and not just because of the history, but because of the knowledge and the companionship and the friendship and the sheer transcendentalism of being here as not only a historian and a writer, but to share our knowledge and the things that we do with everybody. There's nothing better to me than somebody coming up to me and saying, "Can you explain transcendentalism to me?" And my answer is, well, do you want the 10-minute answer or the 14-hour answer? They only take the 10-minute answer, but still, if anybody wanted the 14-hour answer, it would happen here in Concord. I can almost guarantee it. So to finish up, what I would like to say to those of you that have been here time and time again, for those of you that are only here for the first time, and for those of you that are on social media that have never been here, whenever you get here, and if I run into you, what I would honestly like to say to you is, welcome home. Thank you.
Not only was that within the time limit, but there were no notes. I like that. Okay, we have time for a lot of questions. Let's do 2 minutes and then we'll save it for the end.
Yeah, Tammy. Yeah, I think that I don't like him as much as I used to. Oh, the question is, how have my perceptions of Henry changed in the 23 years? I mean, I always like him, but I think that when I first moved here, I was completely enamored with him. I mean, I still am, but you know, he's the guy. He's why I'm here. I get to be him. I get paid to be Henry. And I really adore him, but every now and again, actually quite often, I'm reading through the journals and I'm reading something I think, oh my God, Henry, enough with whatever, you know. I think that my interpretation has changed a lot as well. When I first started being him, there was more Richard than Henry in my answers, or when I'm being him. I had to really learn to put Richard away and give you answers as thorough. I mean, I might not like the answer that I'm giving you. You know, I find that, you know, when I'm using words, 19th century words like queer and gay and things like that, you know, I'm kind of uncomfortable saying that stuff. But if it's 1847, you kind of have to use the language, you know. So my interpretation has certainly changed in the sense that I'm able to put my own personal feelings and my own personal ideals away and present you with just his ideals and his words, which I think is important. When you step into that house replica at Walden Pond, you're stepping into my world. You're stepping into 1847. And so when you're there, you're going to experience everything about it. I like to say that I know more about the 19th century than Thoreau did. But I'm able to throw out stuff about the Mexican War and the abolitionists and whatever. Because I want you to get not only a rounded picture of this guy, but also the world that he's inhabiting. So.
I think we have time for one more question.
Has what changed? Has my audience changed in 23 years? I talk to way more Unitarians than I used to. So I do a lot of Unitarian groups, but I'm also finding that I think now people, at least school groups that I deal with or tourist groups, a lot of them are coming to Walden Pond specifically because they've heard about me doing this thing. And so I think that they come to the pond to meet Henry. They're more prepared. So, and I'm also finding that even the regular tourists who are coming to Walden Pond, they seem to be more into Thoreau and they seem to know more than past people have known. I think that he's more of a household. We like to think he's a household name, but I think he's certainly more of a national figure than even I gave him credit for a long time. Absolutely. Thank you.
Thank you. And our last talk is by Corinne, and the title, I actually remember now, is Like Being at the AG Every Day.
It is. And of course, these are the hardest acts to follow, especially. Yeah. Okay. Hi, my name's Corinne Smith, and I am the manager of the shop at Walden Pond. And I feel as though I've been around tourists all of my life. I'm originally from Lancaster, Pennsylvania, and every summer our highways there would be crowded with cars from New York and New Jersey, full of people who wanted to visit Pennsylvania Dutch country and to see the Amish, or more accurately, what they would say, the Amish. My parents and I were informal tour guides for anybody who visited us from out of town. My mother and I both led formal tours for outsiders at certain points in our lives. And of course, my parents and I turned into tourists ourselves a couple of weeks a year, traveling as far south as Central Florida and as far north as Ottawa, Ontario. We never came to Concord, but we did get to Plymouth once when I was about 11 years old. And of course, we were all suitably disappointed with the sight of Plymouth Rock. So I know from firsthand experience how magical it can be to be a tourist here in Concord. All of these famous people were here, right here. We can walk exactly where they walked. I mean, this is the building that Thoreau taught school in, for heaven's sakes. We can tour these people's homes. It's all wonderful. My first visit to Concord came in December of 2000. I had driven in from Illinois, took a couple of days. Snowed a little overnight, so everything glistened in white. And when I drove past Orchard House that morning, there were some kids standing out there waiting for the school bus. And I wanted to stop and roll down my window and say, "Do you know where you are? Yes, Louisa's house right there." Of course, they knew where they were and they're used to it, you know? When I got to Walden, it was totally snowed over, looked like a big white meadow. And there was still a payphone across the street at the edge of the shop lot. It's standing in a big mound of snow. So I climbed into the snow and I put a quarter in the phone and I called a friend and I said, "Guess where I am?" I'm at Walden and I can see it right now. Of course, I didn't know that 20 years later, I'd be seeing that same thing 5 times a week, at least, with or without snow. And I would be I'd be working at the shop. I'd be certified as a Concord tour guide. We've talked about that a little bit. Here's the certificate you get this year for being it's on parchment kind of paper this time, Victor, for being a Concord tour guide. Yeah. So the town has been licensing tour guides for some kind of quality control since 1905. That's how much they've known at, enhancing what Beth said about when people started coming. 1905, the town realized, the people were going to come. So at least 1 million people come to Concord every year. And Bob and Don are going to help me show this chart. And if you can pull it in front of the table and in the light, it's really awkward. Okay. So 1.5 million people come to Concord every year. This is how many people come to Walden Pond. It's about 600,000 people come to Walden Pond a year. The park did this survey a couple of years ago. Thanks, guys. I know it's awkward. To find out where people came from and why they came to the pond. So I'm going to tell you what the chart says if you can't see it. The top pie chart represents where people are from. And the numbers are pretty much what you would expect. Most visitors are from the region, with 15% from the immediate towns of Concord and Lincoln, 22% from the Boston area, 19% from other towns across New England, 17% came from other parts of the country, and 27% came from other countries. These numbers belie the fact that a fair amount of New Englanders have international roots themselves. And on any given day, when you walk around the pond path and you make that circular saunter yourself, you can probably hear 3, 4, 5 or more languages being spoken, which is pretty cool. The bottom pie chart represents the reason why people came to the park. Now, they did this survey in the summer, so it shouldn't surprise you that 41% of the people came specifically to swim. It is a public swimming beach and it is popular. But 24% came specifically for Thoreau, 16% came for general history of the place, and 15% came for recreation, which would take in hiking and fishing and kayaking and paddleboarding. 4% were school groups. So you have to remember that not everybody who comes to Walden knows or even cares about Henry David Thoreau, which at first is a kind of sobering thought. Thank you, Bob and Don. You can put that flat down on the floor in front of you because it's gonna, or do whatever you want to do. Do whatever you want to do. Thank you, Bob and Don. Of course, the last 2 years gave us some different figures. In fact, the park set a record in 2020 with 668,000 visitors because the parks never closed. The state never closed the parks and people wanted to get out. And so the people that we met over the last 2 years have been mostly New Englanders rediscovering New England. They wanted to get out, but they weren't allowed to go far. And like Beth said, people want to travel. It's this urge. They wanted to go out. And we heard a lot of people say, I've lived in this area all my life. I've never been here before. I don't know why I haven't come. It's wonderful. Well, yeah, it is. Thank you. It is. It's a gratifying experience for us to be able to turn people on to special places that are right in their backyards and they may not have even known. So that was kind of an unexpected opportunity of the last 2 years. So there's no denying that Concord is a bustling hive of activity. And while we are not exactly the beekeepers of this hive, I'd like to suggest 5 bees and 2 keeps as recommendations for anyone who wants to join us in welcoming the rest of the world to Concord. First, be knowledgeable. Know your stuff. Read everything you can. Read Bob Gross and Laura Walls and Bob Richardson and Walter Harding, and don't stop with the Transcendentalists, because you have to know about the Concord fight in April 19th, 1775 too, and what happened at the North Bridge, and what happened along this road to Boston. Why is there a Union Jack and a rock across the common from here? You have to know all of these things on both major subjects, no matter where you work in town, because people are going to ask you questions, no matter where you work. And then you have to perform a magic trick. You have to distill all of your knowledge into short but accurate answers for visitors. Like when they ask you, who was this Thoreau guy anyway? Or North Bridge, what is that again? Yeah, you have to have good short answers that are accurate and that convey the right information. So you really have to work on this. A visitor once looked at our books in the shop and said, Thoreau, Emerson, what's the difference again? To which your first reaction is to say, how much time you got? My quick interpretation, which is borderline flippant, is Emerson wrote it and Thoreau lived it. Some folks will get that explanation and will accept it immediately. Others will want to talk about it for a long time. And this isn't just knowing about the revolution and the author and Concord history. You have to know about Concord today, because you have to answer all the logistical questions. Where's the best place for lunch? Where can I buy fishing bait? Hopefully not the same place. Where is there a gas station that has air pump for tires? These are all questions I've been asked. Is Orchard House open today? Or the museum? Or the old manse? Or whatever, yada, yada, yada. You have to know it all. Visitors expect you to, and you have to know. You would tour every house yourself, so you know what they're in for when they go for the tour. Eat at different restaurants so you can describe them. That's not such a bad idea, actually, right? Everything is material for your arsenal of information. You have to also be knowledgeable about people. You have to continually and automatically, but quickly gauge how much they really want to know and how much time they have to talk, or how much they want to talk. Because your interaction with a casual tourist will be one thing, your extended conversations with pilgrims who have been waiting their whole lives to make this trip will be quite another. You have to be prepared for anyone or anything at any time. So that's another B I didn't add to the list, but I think be knowledgeable covers it. Be well-traveled yourself. Humans look to connect with other humans, and geography is something that can connect us, as Victor used with his New Brunswick reference. Ask where the visitors are from, and if we've been there ourselves, then we can establish immediate common ground. We may have been at the same places at the same time. We may have even known some of the same people. That sometimes happens. I think it's helpful for all of us that we came from away. We came from Pennsylvania, Maryland, New Jersey, and Ohio. We made deliberate decisions to come here and to work here and to interpret the story for others. So in a way, we're fellow travelers ourselves. We know what it's like to see Concord for the first time and to learn all this stuff and be impressed by it. We weren't born knowing it already. And we like to travel and see other sites in other places, which helps us make more connections with more people. And again, everything is material for your arsenal of information. Be patient. You are going to be asked the same questions over and over and over again. Do your best not to get irked and not to be too flippant. After all, you may be the only authority that visitor will talk to when they're in the Concord area. So if they're asking questions, then they deserve true answers. Patience can be a real challenge though, and I have to work at this quality almost every day. I mean, what can you say when somebody comes to Walden, looks kind of around, doesn't get it, and said, so is there anything else to do in the area? or they come to Walden and say, what is there to do here? It can just be too easy to say, nope, just keep on moving. Nothing to see here, nothing to see or do. I end up saying maybe too loudly, tons of things to see and do. And I give them brochures and magazines and I send them on their way. And hopefully they make it to downtown Concord and over to the North Bridge at least. Be resilient. It may take some time at first for you to keep up with the demands that the constant stream of visitors will have for you, but gradually you'll have your own supply of short answers at the ready and you'll be able to hold your own in a lengthy discussion. You'll know where the most asked for amenities are in the area. You won't be surprised by battalions of bicyclists on every road on the weekend. You'll have gotten used to navigating through the traffic on Route 2 to A, 117, 95, and 495. You may even learn how to zipper effectively and effortlessly before or entering the Concord Rotary, and I can teach you how to do this if you need to know. And as the tourist season goes on, which is really all year long, you will gain confidence and the work will get easier and easier as the tourists come faster and faster, and you'll suddenly come to realize that, yes, you can do this and you can give people good information and good advice and you even enjoy it. Yes. And then we reach October. What happens in October? What happens in October? It's the invasion of the leaf peeper. Suddenly, even more people descend upon you, and now they have different questions. When will the leaves start turning? Why haven't they started yet? When will they be at peak? I'm not kidding. When will they be at peak? If they're not turning here and they're not at peak here, where can I go to where they're going to be at peak? We get phone calls like that at the shop. I'm coming in 2 weeks. Do you think the leaves will be at peak? I don't know. In addition to everything else, we have to be botanists or foresters or predictors of color. These folks want concrete answers to questions that really can only be answered by the trees themselves. Thoreau wrote in Autumnal Tints that October is the month of painted leaves. He also said that this fact is scarcely remembered by the majority from year to year. Well, not anymore, Henry. Now the majority comes specifically to see the leaves. They remember them and they want color on demand and they expect us to somehow supply it to them now. So in addition to all the tidbits and trinkets about Concord and the Revolution and the authors, you also need to find a way to keep it fresh. You need to get away from this madness on a regular basis. I do this by living 38 miles west of Concord. I have a 45-minute commute on a dry road without any traffic. I keep home and work separate. Now, a lot of times I go home and then I start making videos about Henry. So really, there's no escape. 2.5 of my fellow panelists live in Concord. I don't know how they do it. I know they get away from it a lot of times too. I know that they enjoy it, but I know that they escape it sometimes too. And keep your sense of humor. You just have to. Concord and Walden Pond can be nutty places that attract all kinds of different people, and you just have to go along with the flow. I mean, I am lucky to know these 3 people and to know that these 3 are among the funniest people I know. Victor and I were once sitting at an Alcott discussion, an Alcott lecture. So somebody was up there talking about Louisa May transforming she and her sisters to Joe and Meg and Beth and Amy March. And Victor leans over to me and says, you know, she could have called the book March Madness. At the shop, we used to have a jar on the counter of buttons that had author portraits on it. And a woman in my age range came in one day and she's pawing through it. And she says, I don't even know what he looks like. Is this him? And I figured she meant Thoreau. And I looked and I said, no, that's Emerson. And she said, oh. So she keeps on looking at it without missing a beat. She said, are Lake and Palmer in here too? Are you kidding me? A transcendental classic rock reference. Give that woman 15% off anything in the store. Funny stuff. It's not just us being funny, but you know, people are funny too. And do we tell each other and share with each other stories about the unusual things that people have said and done? Of course we do. Of course we do. You just have to laugh. In the end, be grateful. We are lucky enough to work in a fascinating place that can attract fascinating people. We get to talk about Henry and Waldo and Bronson and Louisa and Nathaniel and Sophia all day long if we want to. We can show people sites, S-I-T-E-S, and sites, S-I-G-H-T-S, that they've never seen before, and sometimes sites that they've wanted to see for years. It's gratifying to be able to give visitors what they want and what they need when they need it. We're all lucky enough to have found work in the most estimable place in all the world and in the very nick of time too. Thank you.
I just realized what's going on. We got four bosses here because they're all guides, right? And I'm supposed to be the panelist chair, right? Good job. Everybody knows what they're doing. They stayed on time. We have lots of time left. I know. And I can keep my sense of humor. So, general questions from the audience about anything. Ideally, focused on the topic of Concord and the panelists. Yeah, we got one back there. After 2 years, it's so good to be back. What a great stuff. Yes, thank you very much. I agree.
By the way, I should say that
agree.
if anybody ever asks you when peak season is for the leaves, whenever I get asked, I always say October 13th, 4:26 a.m. That's all I ever say.
Okay, we have another question this time up front. Thank you, Tom.
One aspect of Henry David Thoreau that you're most proud of representing and want to be most interesting.
I'll repeat the question. To each of the panelists, what would you be most proud of representing Thoreau?
I think the best thing for me about Thoreau is getting the point across that he was wicked funny. He had an amazing sense of humor. Walden is full of really good and bad puns. And the fact that he had a great sense of humor, to me, is what I think is really important that people are not really aware of.
I like that he documents everything. We were researching streetcars and when they were here and I'm like, was Henry there? Did he document it? No, he was dead by then. But you know, things that you don't think he documents, he's documented them, and it helps you as a storyteller and it helps you track history as well.
I think it's his approach to simplicity. People ask me about Thoreau and simplicity often, and one of the things that I often find myself saying is it wasn't a minimalist aesthetic, that it was a conscious choice to make his needs simple, so that he had the luxury of time to study nature and to write, and that he didn't, as many of his neighbors did, just get swallowed up devoting his life to making money to support his material needs. He kept his material needs simple. So it wasn't an aesthetic choice. It was a lifestyle choice.
No, I don't have anything to say. I think when Victor talked earlier about the fact that people learn about the Revolutionary War, but what'd you say? A quarter of what they know is wrong. If we can help correct some of the misconceptions about Henry, I mean, yeah, these guys covered some of that too, but you have to really engage in discussion with that. You can't just say, no, you're wrong. you know, let's not even think about the silly laundry. You know, you engage and you politely point out that the book is called Walden, not On Walden Pond. Yesterday I was telling Richard, a woman demanded, she said, you don't have a postcard that says, that has On Walden Pond on it. I said, no, there's nothing called On Walden Pond. Yes, there is. Didn't he write a poem called On Walden Pond? I said, no, he wrote a book called Walden. If we can help, you know, guide and I think being here where he was helps a lot, but people can actually see it for themselves. They read it and then they understand.
Thank you. So that question was answered from all of the panelists as requested. I have two from the live stream. I'll get to you after them. We still have time. We have a question from Ellen Fine, and it's addressed to Beth. We're being inclusive of our audience outside here. And it's, were there any women that served as nurses, you know, I think other than Louisa May, but the question is, will they be included on the memorial?
No, they won't be on the memorial because they didn't die as a result of the Civil War before the first monument was erected. So it's only if you died before the first committee was erected. They were whatever. But no, there's a woman named Annie Kimball Brown, and she is in Sleepy Hollow Cemetery. She's buried there, and she has a flag. And her husband was also in the Civil War, and he has a flag too. So if you know where the Hoar plot is, HOAR, not the other kind. It is across, if you look at the Hoar plot, up the hill, turn around, and on the right-hand corner, you will find Brown. It's looks like a casket kind of above the ground, and you will find their resting place.
Okay, Beth, thank you. That answers Ellen's question. I hope that that worked. I've got one more, and then we'll come back to you. This is from Bob Young, and it is addressed to Richard. And the question is, do any of your guests ask questions just to trick you?
Of course they do. But are they successful?
Oh, come
No, the closest I got a question once from an 8th grade boy, as they do. I was walking with this group of kids around Walden, dressed in my full gear, and this kid said, Mr. Thoreau, if you knew there was a guy 150 years from now who's pretending to be you, what would you say? Inside, I'm going, God love you. But instantly, without even batting an eye, Mr. Thoreau said, and I think this is the way Henry would feel. Mr. Thoreau said, I would tell him to get his own life and leave my life alone.
Okay. Yeah. Those 8th graders can be pretty juicy. Watch out. Okay, so we're done with the two that came in from outside, and we have time for your question.
So this year we're talking about global Thorson. So we talk to your audience on the news. And do you have a sense of a reason of globalization for the people who are living?
So the question is, I missed one word there, but the idea is that the people that are coming from around, do you address the issue of globalization with them? So that's the question then. Yeah.
Sure. I
To
mean,
Richard and Corinne. Yeah.
she said no. So we're doing it.
Okay.
Okay. So, I mean, so whenever I meet somebody from a different country who said that they've read Thoreau, or Walden, my first question is always, did you read it in English or did you read it in your language? Which I find to be a really interesting question, because then I actually start to ask them questions. Well, what's the title like in whatever language? And so I want to see how much of the English version is different from a foreign language edition. But I'm also, like, if I meet Germans, I always say that transcendentalism is their fault. And they laugh because they get it. I find that a lot of our Asian visitors are incredibly well versed on Thoreau and Walden. more than any other part of the world of the people I meet. A lot of our Japanese visitors and a lot of our Chinese visitors absolutely know Walden really well. And I always find that really interesting. And I always ask them, where did you discover it? Because I want to find out where people from other parts of the world read this stuff. And so that's the part that fascinates me. So yeah, I always try to find out how much they know and why they're here. I think that's really important.
I agree. I'm just so geographically and place-based and oriented that I too want to say to these people, where were you when you read it? I get sometimes ask people, who come from other parts of the country too, because it doesn't really matter what habitat you're in. You sort of picture it in your mind and you make it your own when you read Walden in a different place. I read it in southeastern Pennsylvania, in the farmland of Pennsylvania Dutch country. But my grandparents' farm had a train track next to it. And my father used to kick up arrowheads a lot. And so I made that connection. It's impactful when you get here and you see the real place. But I think part of the genius of Henry's creative writing is that you can read it anywhere and it makes sense. And it makes even more sense when you come, but you don't have to come if you can't. You're making it your own, which wouldn't he want you to do? Investigate your own nature, do your own kinds of study like he did. It's just so universal. It's just so universal. And I'm getting chills just even saying that, maybe.
Universal is beyond global.
Was that your fifth word, Thor?
No, I can't remember. Okay, we are in great shape. We have 9 minutes left before we're officially supposed to end. So I will, as moderator, take additional questions. Yes, right here. Okay, so I will try to repeat the question. It's how much of the indigenous knowledge and literature is presented in your talk? But there was a first part about Rome that I didn't get the question on. Sure. Yes. Sure. Yeah, there's certainly a contemporaneous history here in what would become Concord at the time when Rome was having a flourishing history already. So so the question then addressed to the panelists is, do you address it? And I'd like to know who wants to pick that up. Beth? Okay, Beth has volunteered.
So Victor and I both work at the Concord Museum. I'm an educator, he's an interpreter. And I know that when we have children come in, we have a program specifically on the indigenous people. But also if you're just a visitor and you go to the Concord Museum, the first item you see as you round a corner is a projectile point that is 10 to 12,000 years old. Yeah, and it was found here in Concord by a gentleman who was the gym teacher and his daughter who was a teenager. And they brought it to the museum and it was dated and all. So yeah, so our history does go far back. It's not a tour a lot of people take. It is a specialized tour from the town, and he can talk about that. But it comes up in tours, but most people come here for the American Revolution and for the Transcendentalists. So yeah.
Yeah, so as Beth said, people have been living here for 12,000 years, and archaeologists have studied the things that they made and used, the projectile points, and we know a lot from what archaeologists have studied. We know, for instance, that it wasn't a static civilization, that for thousands of years, people living here were spear hunters. About 1,600 years ago, they started hunting with bow and arrow. This is something that was presumably learned because there was an extensive network of trade among North American tribes. So when they met another tribe with cool stuff, they traded with them and they got the cool stuff. Around 1,000 years ago, they began farming here, again, presumably learned through contact with other tribes. Then around 400 years ago, the English show up. Well, as far as the Muscataquid is what this place was called before the English. As far as the Muscataquid people were concerned, the English were just another tribe that had cool stuff. And they had metal tools, so they traded with them, they got the metal tools. The stone tool making tradition starts to taper off at that point. Henry was very interested in the history and the lives of the indigenous people, although there weren't a lot of them living in Concord at the time that he was alive. But he certainly found and studied a lot of the stone tools. Early on in his life, he had a kind of naive, romantic, noble savage kind of idea about the indigenous people of this region. When he went up to the Maine woods, he came to see the indigenous people of the Northeast not as romantic figures from the past, but as very real people in his own time, and to learn about their lives in a more mature, sophisticated way.
Thank you. Anyone else? Well, Clamshell Bank or Hill of Concord is founded at the center of the three rivers. You know, the three rivers that take off from that point. And that was where the native settlements were most concentrated as well. At least that was their headquarters. But Clamshell Bank further upriver is literally a pharaoh's tomb of archaeology for New England. It's the richest inland site for many, many years. And I won't go on. There's a very rich archaeology. Well, there is a Thoreau had an arrowhead or tool collection that was fairly extensively known, and it dissipated and moved back and forth. He's been fascinated with that for years and years. The Clamshell Bank is mostly, if I got it right, it's middle to late archaic. It's in the several thousand year old range. It was a very rich bend in the river that for various reasons, it included just the right sandiness, you know, to have a rich record of clams. So there are layers that are nearly a foot thick, all right, of just clamshells and fire hearths up there that were in the bank. And Henry studied those when it was gullied out after some of the heavy rainstorms. I did a fair bit of work on this myself, but I would not call it an archaeological synthesis. But there's at least one chapter in a book that I wrote called The Boatman that deals with this extensively. It was ruined. I mean, it was paved over and ruined like so many things. It was the richest inland site, and it's rich because of the wetlands. The Muscataquid wetlands had a very unique situation. And so I'll leave it at that. Now we are at 5:27. I think I saw Mike back there. He has a question. Okay, Mike has an announcement. So I think I will surrender the podium as the narrator. We'll consider this session done. I want to thank all of the panelists for their spectacular grade. And I'll read. And the next time somebody asks me if I'd be willing to chair a session, I'm going to ask, are they guides? And I'll say, I'll take the one with the guides. Okay, so thank you. Mike has it as an announcement. Thank you, Thorson.
Thank you. Well, welcome. I just wanted a quick announcement that for those of you who are joining us for the picnic dinner at the Umbrella, we do have your meal tickets now at the registration table. We're a little late getting you that information because it was a last minute program that we put together. So for those of you who ordered, your meal tickets are now available. And thank you everybody for joining us tonight. What a wonderful crowd we had for this first session.
Thank you.